Hey, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. The time is 5:30 p.m. Eastern, and we will now start the third and final virtual public scoping meeting for the environmental review of the Kitty Hawk Offshore Wind Commercial Construction and Operations Plan for Commercial Lease OCS-A-0508 offshore North Carolina. Thank you, everyone, for participating. My name is Jennifer Piggott, and I will serve as the facilitator for today's meeting. I'm with ICF, the independent third-party contractor supporting the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management, or Boem. I do want to note that this meeting is being recorded. If you do not wish to be part of this recorded meeting, please disconnect from the call. The recording of this meeting will be posted on the project website. Additionally, recordings of the previous 2 virtual scoping meetings are available on the virtual public meeting page of the project website. Let's review the agenda for today's meeting. We will begin with a series of opening remarks and presentations, which should take about an hour. First, Michelle Morin, the Chief of the Environmental Branch for Renewable Energy for Boem, will provide a few opening remarks. Next, I'm sure many of us have become familiar with Zoom over the last year, but we will review a few tips for the Zoom platform, and I'll point out some key features we'll be using today. Then we will move into a few presentations. The first presentation is a brief background and history on the offshore energy leasing process given by Will Waskes of Boem. Following Will, Brian Crever, the Boem NEPA team lead for this project, will provide an overview of the environmental review process. Then finally, Brian Benito with Avangrid will provide an overview of the proposed project. At that point, we'll take a quick break to let you stretch before we convene to take public comments. Following formal public comments, we'll take another quick break and conclude with a question and answer session. So as you can see, we have a full agenda for today, so let's get started. Again, thank you for joining us today. I would now like to introduce Michelle Morin, the Chief of the Environmental Branch for Renewable Energy with Boem, for some intro remarks. Michelle?
Thank you, Jennifer, and good evening, everyone. As Jennifer said, my name is Michelle Morin, and I am the Chief of the Environment Branch for Renewable Energy in the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management, or Boem. And I want to welcome you to the last of our 3 virtual public scoping meetings for Boem's review of the proposed Kitty Hawk Offshore Wind Project. So, as we've said in previous meetings, we really wish we could be meeting in person, but we found this technology and this format a good alternative to in-person meetings. And in the past 1.5 years, we've held over 24 meetings using this format. For those of you who aren't already familiar with Boem, we are a bureau within the Department of the Interior, and we oversee the development of our energy and mineral resources on the outer continental shelf for the OCS. And that's almost 2.5 billion acres that we oversee. It's our job to ensure this development is done in an environmentally and economically responsible way. All of our activities are supported by a robust environmental program, which ensures that we develop, but also use the best available science and information in our decision making. Public involvement is essential in Boem's renewable energy program. Your input plays a vital role in our environmental analysis and ensures the best informed decision regarding this and other proposed projects. Thank you again for joining us to learn more about our environmental review process and the proposed project. There are about 40 individuals pre-registered for today's meeting. And we have about a dozen members of Boem participating in the meeting. And so we all look forward to hearing your comments and answering any questions you may have. And now I'll turn it back to you, Jennifer.
Great, thanks, Michelle, for your remarks. I want to take a minute or 2 to review the features that we'll be using during our Zoom meeting today. At any time during the meeting, if you need assistance with the Zoom platform, you can use the chat feature located at the bottom of your screen to message the meeting host, or you can send an email to kittyhawk@icf.com. And we just put that email address in the chat. We appreciate your participating in this virtual public scoping meeting. We'd much rather be with you in person, but with the current conditions, we want to provide all the information that we can while protecting everyone's health. We will work to conduct this meeting in a manner that closely resembles that of an in-person meeting. Please make note of the phone number for this meeting. The phone number is 1-888-788-0099, meeting ID 819-3977-8108, password 41607499. If you experience difficulty with your internet connection at any point during the meeting, you can call this number to listen to the meeting. Additionally, individual internet connections and bandwidths may vary and may impact your viewing experience. We recommend closing all apps and programs and limiting other streaming or downloads while you're participating in this meeting. Finally, we're running this meeting using Zoom webinar, which mutes all participants and restricts video feeds. When we get to the public comment portion of today's meeting, the meeting host will unmute you so you can make your statement. For any media representatives that join the meeting today, please contact Stephen Boutwell, the Public Information Officer, at Stephen, STEPHEN.Boutwell, BOUTWELL, at boem.gov. Before we begin, I'd like to review some ground rules for today's online public scoping meeting. As previously stated, we will provide several presentations before accepting formal comments, and Boem will answer any clarifying questions raised during the meeting. When we get to the formal comment portion of today's call, I will call on the people who requested to make a comment when they registered. All names will be called in the order in which we received your registration. After all those folks have commented, I will ask if anyone else would like to make a comment. You would then use the raise your hand feature on the Zoom platform, or if you're calling in from a phone, you would press *9 to raise your hand. I will call on people to comment in the order in which you raise your hand. During the comment period, I'll post the names of the next 2 to 5 speakers in the chat so you can see when your turn is coming up. When I call your name, you will receive a pop-up box on your screen. For those on the phone, you will hear a prompt that will allow you to unmute yourself to make your comment. Throughout today's meeting, if you think of a question that you need clarified, please type your question into the question and answer box on the Zoom platform. Please note the question and answer box is different from the chat box on the Zoom platform. When we get to the question and answer portion of today's meeting, Boem staff will answer your clarifying questions. Please note, when we receive your questions and the team begins working on an answer, we'll move your question to the dismiss category, and then once we're ready, we'll read your question and provide an answer aloud. We will review all of this again before the comment period and the question and answer session. Please keep in mind that this meeting is being recorded and transcribed, and I would ask that there is no inappropriate language. As a reminder, scoping comments can also be submitted through regulations.gov. All comments, whether received orally today, at a previous meeting, or in writing, are weighted equally. We appreciate the opportunity to share these project updates and the environmental process with all of you. We wish that we could be together in person, but we're glad to come together virtually. Again, the purpose of this virtual public scoping meeting is to share information about the project and to receive your public scoping comments. We're now going to start the presentations for today's meeting. Our first presenter is Will Waskis of Bohm. Will?
Okay. Thank you, everyone. My name is Will Waskis. I am Bohm's project coordinator for the Kitty Hawk Wind commercial lease 0508. So today I'm going to be providing an overview of kind of how we came to where we are today. So taking a little trip back in time to cover the planning and leasing process of the Kitty Hawk lease area. So hopefully you'll find this informative as you're making any comments, scoping comments on the project. Next slide. So what this slide is depicting is essentially Bohm's renewable energy authorization process. It encompasses 4 major stages. So there's a planning and analysis stage, there's a leasing stage, there's a site assessment stage, and there's a construction and operations stage. Next slide. Okay, for today's presentation, we're going to focus on this area in the red box, that planning and leasing, the planning and leasing stages of the process. And again, really focusing on how the Kitty Hawk area was identified, and then ultimately led to the construction operations plan that was submitted today. Next slide. So this is really zooming in on the planning and leasing stage. So there's a couple milestones here to really have folks be kind of cognizant of. So that planning process starts with the publication of a Federal Register notice. It can either be a request for interest or a call for information and nominations. In the case of Kitty Hawk, it was a call for information and nominations, which really does two primary things. It takes an area and it is seeking commercial interest in that area, as well as requesting information on environmental resources and multiple uses within that area. So after that process is completed, we take the information that we receive and review it, and that is essentially what is called the area identification process. So that is really taking the information we received, kind of examining it, refining that area to come up with a wind energy area. So that wind energy area forms the basis for our leasing process. So in order to support that leasing process, we have to conduct an environmental assessment that will basically support the issuing of that lease and site characterization work on that lease area. Once that's completed, we really move into the heart of the leasing process, which is the publication of two notices, a proposed sale notice and a final sale notice. And those are essentially, as the names kind of allude to, the proposed sale notice is essentially kind of a draft of the contract that an applicant would be bidding on. It also describes the auction, how it's going to unfold, what the rules are, so on and so forth. And then the final sale notice basically takes the comments that we received from that proposed sale notice and finalizes all of those decisions. And then we ultimately have an auction for the area. Next slide. So throughout that whole planning and leasing process, really centered is Bohm's renewable energy task forces. And their kind of first task, if you will, out the gate really falls to that call for information nominations. As I noted, there has to be an area that is put out for comment on those environmental resources, multiple uses of the area, and that developer interest. So that was the first real undertaking that occurred in this planning process. So what you can see on the right-hand side is essentially a snapshot of kind of all of the different issues, whether they were environmental issues, multiple use issues, kind of overlaid along the North Carolina coast that we kind of had to filter through as a task force. So we did that really through a couple kind of pillars, if you will. One really being leveraging all of the federal and state and NGO studies that were available for that area. We were lucky enough in North Carolina to have a pretty robust North Carolina effort that had already begun trying to filter out some of these multiple use and environmental resource issues. Obviously, we had done a call area delineation off other states before North Carolina, so we wanted to take the lessons learned from those processes. So as always, there's always existing data, but new data that's always coming along, as well as ways to process data to help kind of answer questions related to environmental resources and multiple uses. So that was a real pillar that we looked at, using that data and trying to refine it to answer questions. And again, the task force is really composed of elected state or other federal representatives of elected state and tribal governments, as well as other federal agencies. So stakeholder input for folks with outside that was key to bring to the task force as well. And you'll see some of that in these next few slides. And again, working together kind of as that body to help inform Bohm of how to move forward. Next slide. So after looking at all of that information and going through that process, we identified 3 areas to include in a call for information and nominations. You'll see 3 here. One is the Wilmington East, Wilmington West, and the Kitty Hawk. Obviously, for today's presentation, we'll be focusing primarily on the Kitty Hawk area. Next slide. So in terms of nominations of interest, so you can see in that Kitty Hawk area, essentially all of it was at least nominated by 4 different developers. And then a subset within that area was nominated by 1 developer, really with a keen understanding of trying to get a greater distance from shore, noting that there could be visual impact concerns, as well as trying to alleviate vessel traffic that would run along the North Carolina shore. Next slide. Key issues we received. I've tried to categorize these into kind of the major themes, and there's some sub themes within those major themes. But visual impacts, not only from coastal communities, but from National Park Service assets was a primary concern. Vessel traffic, again, not only nearshore traffic or tug and barge traffic that runs closer to the coast, but as well as what we call deep water traffic or cargo and tanker vessels that skirt further offshore, and particularly are in large abundance, given the port of Virginia just being to the north. So we did receive new information on shrimping activity, as well as feedback on transits offshore to the continental shelf, and as well as concerns about right whales and some recommendations on marine mammal stipulations that could be included. Next slide. So I'm only going to cover some of the biggest issues that were, I guess, of the most influence in terms of shaping the area. I would say probably the biggest and one of the more hardest for us to tackle was the navigational concerns. So Bohm did work with a maritime working group composed of other stakeholders to not only solicit their feedback for how they use the area, but also look at the available data, which at the time was really primarily through what is called AIS data, or automatic identification system data, essentially kind of GPS on ships. So you can see we were able to do a density analysis. You can see this in the middle of the slide. You can see there's a little bit of an odd pattern there that led us to do some additional directional analysis, as well as some proximity analysis in terms of how close ships were coming to with one another. Next slide. Probably the biggest in terms of number of comments were visual concerns. To help address those, we conducted a visualization study specific to North Carolina. We looked at 18 different locations using 4 lighting conditions, 3 distances from shore, using 2 different turbine models, a 3.6 megawatt machine and an 8 megawatt machine. The 3.6 being what was being contemplated at the time, and our attempt at trying to project out into the future with the larger 8 megawatt machine, which obviously, if you're following the latest trends, you can see that has now been surpassed by even bigger models. We took the results from that study and we conducted several open houses. We did them in Kitty Hawk, Wilmington, Carolina Shores, and Southport. Not only looking at showing them the daylight simulations, but well as nighttime simulations. Next slide. So what you're seeing here really moves into the area identification process, which is taking that information. So what you can see on the left side, you're seeing kind of 2 larger polygons. Those were 2 options that really helped address the navigational concerns in terms of either of these options were suitable for moving forward with. We were, again, lucky enough to have that maritime working group working with the Coast Guard, American Waterways Association, et cetera, to help kind of formulate these 2 recommendations. So you can see kind of these distance lines from shores, as well as this arc in the left side. That was in response to visual concerns, again, not only from coastal communities, but from National Park Service assets. And as you can see, requests really ranged considerably from just not really knowing how sure or how positive you would be able to see these, from just making sure they were out of line of sight, to probably the most common you'll hear is either a 24 or 26 mile setback. So on the right-hand side of the screen, you can see ultimately how we took that and how we chose a wind energy area. So kind of the outlined area is the original call area, and that orange area is the wind energy area that was ultimately selected. Next slide. So now that we have that area selected, we did an environmental assessment on that area, again, covering lease issuance, site assessment activities, and site characterization activities, not construction and operations activities, to support the actual kind of heart of the leasing process. So we published a proposed sale notice in August of 2016. The final sale notice went out in January of 2017, and we held the auction in March of 2017. There were 4 bidders, went 17 rounds. The ultimate winning bid was just over $9 million. Avangrid Renewables was the winner of that. On the right side, you can kind of see the late stages of the auction results of how the auction kind of filtered out. Next slide. So since that time, Avgrid or Kitty Hawk Wind has been diligently surveying, investigating their lease area in support of a COP that was submitted to us in December of 2020. It's available on our website for your perusal. So, and ultimately, once we conduct the environmental review that you're going to hear about in more detail from Brian Crever here in a minute, we can either approve, disapprove, or approve that COP with conditions. Next slide. So here's my contact information at the bottom of the screen. Always happy to field any questions that we may get. Feel free to email me or call me.
Okay, great. Thanks, Will. Appreciate the presentation. Our next presenter is Brian Crever with Bohm. Brian?
Thank you, Jennifer, and good evening, everyone. My name is Brian Crever, and I am the NEPA team lead within Bohm's Office of Renewable Energy Programs. And today I'm going to be talking to you about the National Environmental Policy Act, or NEPA process. Next slide. So, Will talked about our leasing and development process earlier, so I won't go over this too much, but I wanted to point out exactly where we are currently in the process. And you can see that kind of orange box right there. And it shows that we are just at the beginning of our environmental and technical review process for the Kitty Hawk construction and operations plan. Next slide. So a little more about the construction and operations plan that was submitted to Boem by Kitty Hawk. And the initial COP was submitted back in December of 2020. We provided comments on that construction operation plan and received a revised COP in 2021 in June, and provided some additional comments and received another revised COP, which is the one that's currently available on our website in July of 2021. And what we'll do is, through our environmental review, we'll either approve, disapprove, or approve with modifications the construction operation plan. And that's after we complete our environmental impact statement. And it'll be documented by something called a record of decision, or ROD. Next slide. So the National Environmental Policy Act is a procedural law requiring federal agencies to assess environmental effects of proposed actions and reasonable alternatives prior to making decisions. And often you'll hear the NEPA process referred to as an environmental review. And I always like to point out that it's not the National Environmental Protection Act. When NEPA was developed and passed as a law, Congress recognized that actions by the federal government would have environmental impacts. And so what they're really trying to accomplish with this law is two things: informed decision-making, so that those who are in the position to make those decisions, whether to approve projects or have development go forward or not, would understand the environmental consequences of those projects and of those government actions. And also, equally as important, allowing for public participation in the process. And we'll get to that, more of that later. Some major actions and decision points in Bohm's process that require environmental review or a NEPA review is lease issuance for survey work, and also kind of just the action of actually issuing the lease. And this is something that Bohm did an EA for North Carolina in the past. Also for plan approval, site assessment plan for meteorological tower or buoy, as well as construction operation plans like what we're talking about today, or general activities plans if there was a cable to shore that went through federal waters. Also for any decommissioning activities, we would need to do an environmental review as well. Next slide. So this is a more focused on the actual timeline for the environmental review and approval process for a COP. So you saw where the environmental and technical review was beginning. Now we're focusing on what those 2 years actually look like in our process. It all begins with COP submittal, our completeness and sufficiency review. And the clock for a 2-year review begins with the publication of a notice of intent in the Federal Register. With that is a 30-day public comment period, of which we're in right now. And we're required to hold public meetings, public scoping meetings, which this is the third and final of those meetings. And really importantly, we're trying to receive input on issues to be analyzed and alternatives to be considered. The next step in the process is the publication of a draft environmental impact statement. This will be prepared with the assistance of cooperating agencies, and it'll be published in the Federal Register. There'll be a notice of availability letting everyone know that that document's available. That'll again begin a 45-day public comment period, and we'll be back again holding public hearings for that. So another opportunity for public input. After we address public comments with the support of cooperating agencies, we would issue a final environmental impact statement and again, publish a notice in the Federal Register. There'd be a minimum of a 30-day waiting period after the publication of a final EIS, and then we would publish our record of decision. And again, this process takes approximately 24 months or 2 years. Next slide. So you've heard me talk about the notice of intent to prepare an EIS. Talking a little bit more about what that is. It was published in the Federal Register on July 30th of 2021. And there's a link there that we'll put in the chat for you to access that notice. It's docket number BOEM-2021-0050. And it starts the EIS process and initiates a 30-day public comment period, which ends on August 30th of 2021. The notice itself gives some background on the project, as well as outlines the purpose and need for Bohm's action, and kind of sets the stage for the environmental review to come. It outlines the kind of information we're looking for as well. Next slide. So public comments on the NOI. If you take one thing away from my presentation today, it'll be the information on this slide. The public input is extremely important element of the National Environmental Policy Act and of our environmental reviews. We recognize that local expertise and perspective can really help guide our environmental analysis, and it relates and equals what we're really looking for is more informed decisions. So the type of information that we're looking for from the public will be significant issues to be analyzed in the environmental impact statement, sources of information to be included in the EIS, any data gaps or information needs that exist, as well as reasonable alternatives that we should analyze within the document. And again, comments are due on August 30th of 2021, and you can make comments again through that link below. Next slide. So virtual public scoping meetings. Again, it's unfortunate that we couldn't be there in person. We really enjoy getting to meet stakeholders face to face and having our SMEs be able to interact with stakeholders and answer questions. Our SMEs stands for subject matter experts. But we found that these virtual public scoping meetings are a great way for us to provide information and to get feedback from the public. So today is the last of our 3 virtual meetings, but we have a virtual meeting room where all the materials presented in today's meeting will be available, as well as project posters that talk about different potential effects of offshore wind, as well as some project specific information and environmental conditions existing offshore of North Carolina and in the project area. So I would really encourage everyone to take a look at those posters. All the presentations that you're seeing today will be are on that site as well as more information on exactly how to comment on the NOI and prepare public scoping comments. Next slide. Meeting posters, mention these. I won't name everyone, but there's a lot of great information on there. Abundance of sea turtles and marine mammals, information on electromagnetic fields and marine life, information on project construction, the project design envelope, impacts of underwater noise on protected species, and a lot of information on our NEPA substitution process for Section 106, which you'll hear more about later in this presentation. Next slide. So how to comment, again, there's that link there. The preferred way is online at regulations.gov. Enter BOEM-2021-0050, click search, and then use the comment button, and you can post your comment electronically online, and it'll get to us immediately. There's other ways to comment as well. You can comment at this meeting, either if you're pre-registered or simply raise your hand during our listening session portion. You can make a verbal comment, which we will record, and then we will actually document that comment and upload it to regulations.gov, so it's part of the permanent record. Another way you can do it is via old-fashioned mail, just in an envelope titled Kitty Hawk Cop EIS and addressed to the address you see below. Next slide. So what is an EIS, or an environmental impact statement? It presents the proposed federal action's impact analysis on the environment. It's an interdisciplinary document, and it has the proposed action or the action being analyzed, or reasonable alternatives that could reduce or eliminate impacts. At a minimum, we look at the proposed action and no action alternative, but we really want to see more than that. And that's one of the reasons we're out here today, is trying to get information from those on the ground to tell us what other ways can this project move forward in a way that would still produce renewable energy offshore, but may result in reduced environmental impacts. So that's really what we're looking for there. And then also the document talks about effects, both beneficial and adverse effects. And in addition to that, you might have heard about the new CEQ NEPA implementing regulations that were published in 2020 that took out the term cumulative effects, but we still look at, we still do basically the same cumulative effects analysis. It's just called something different. So we look at the affected environment, and that includes reasonably foreseeable environmental trends and planned actions other than this project. So that's any other action that's going on in the area in the future, in the past, in the present, as well as future offshore wind energy development. Next slide. So again, it's an interdisciplinary document, so it includes an analysis of biological, physical, and socioeconomic resources. So everything from marine mammals and sea turtles to visual resources, tourism and recreation, military uses, and commercial and recreational fishing, to name a few. Next slide. So the environmental review of a construction and operation plan, we allow for something called a project design envelope. And what that does is it allows the developer to submit kind of a range of activities that may occur from their project. And how we analyze that is we look at the maximum impacting parameters for each resource, which may not be the same. Resources can be impacted differently by different elements of the project. So we look at the maximum for each element of the project and each resource. What this allows us to do is it avoids pausing or restarting an environmental review due to project changes. It helps reduce or eliminates the need for subsequent environmental reviews as the project is refined or revised after approval. However, additional environmental review and consultations would be required for revisions that are outside of this design envelope. Next slide. So while we're doing our NEPA, or National Environmental Policy Act, environmental review, we'll also be conducting various consultations that are required, including Section 106 of the National Historic Preservation Act, the Magnuson-Stevens Fisheries Conservation Act, or EFH, or I should say Essential Fish Habitat, the Endangered Species Act, the Marine Mammal Protection Act, and the Coastal Zone Management Act. Next slide. So a little more on exactly how we're going to do our review under Section 106 of the National Historic Preservation Act. We're going to implement something called NEPA substitution for Section 106, and we're doing so to reflect stakeholder needs that we've learned as we've gone through this process for other offshore wind energy projects. For Boem, this is an efficient and streamlined approach to better integrate the National Historic Preservation Act and the National Environmental Policy Act. For leasees, this is clear expectations for environmental review timelines and mitigation costs. For consulting parties and stakeholders, it allows for earlier and more direct input into alternatives and mitigation measure selection. And for tribes, it has a greater focus on government-to-government consultations. Next slide. And in blue, in this slide you see here, you can see exactly where the different elements of Section 106 of the National Historic Preservation Act fit into our NEPA process. Next slide. So using the NEPA process for our Section 106 review, through this process, we're seeking comment and input on some important things, including the identification of historic properties and or potential effects to historic properties from activities associated with the approval of the Kitty Hawk Construction Operation Plan, as well as reasonable alternatives, size, geographic, or other restrictions on construction and siting of facilities and activities, and then potential mitigation measures to be analyzed in the EIS, including ways to avoid, minimize, or otherwise treat and resolve adverse effects on historic properties. Next slide. So the schedule for the environmental impact statement, in early fall of 2022, we would publish our draft EIS, and that would initiate our 45-day public comment period, the next opportunity for public input. In the summer of 2023, we would plan to publish the final EIS. And then in late summer of 2023, we would conclude our consultations and publish a record of decision, or ROD. Next slide. So I'd be remiss if I didn't talk about our Bohm environmental studies program during this presentation. This studies program allows for rigorous scientific research, and it helps inform decision-making processes and fills data gaps. So the website is posted there to access our studies. I've also highlighted a few studies that are relevant to this project, as well as relevant to North Carolina. There was only so many I could fit on this slide, but we've done a lot of studies preparing for the establishment of offshore wind on the Atlantic coast. This includes research on electromagnetic fields, and the first two studies deal with that. We also have a study that helps us learn from some of the wind facilities that have actually been built off of the US East Coast. That includes the project off of Block Island, Rhode Island, and the project off of Virginia. And that study is called the Real-Time Opportunity for Development Environmental Observations, or RODEO. That looks at everything from the sound during installation of the project, sound during operations of the project, impacts to tourism and recreation from these projects. So it looks at a whole host of items for projects that are actually out there that we can learn from. We also have studies looking at impacts from tourism and recreation from offshore wind. And we have an archaeological survey we did actually for the Kitty Hawk wind energy area. Next slide. So that concludes my presentation, but we have our question and answer session. If you have any questions on this, if you think of anything later, my contact information is there. Feel free to give me a call or send me an email, and I'll do my best to answer any questions you may have. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Brian. Our final presenter is Brian Benito with Avangrid. Brian?
Hi, thank you, Jennifer. Good evening. My name is Brian Benito, and I'm the Senior Permitting Manager for the Kitty Hawk Offshore Wind Project. On behalf of Avangrid Renewables, I'd like to thank everyone for attending tonight's scoping meeting, the third and final one for this project. Next slide, please. So some of the things I'd like to cover today is listed out on this agenda right here. Essentially, we'll be providing an informative overview of the area identified through the Bohm leasing process that Will adequately explained in his slides. My goal of my presentation today is to familiarize participants with Avangrid Renewables as a developer, describe the strategies that we've taken to date, and explain where we're looking to go in the future with our construction operations plan. As Will identified, we successfully executed the auction and signed the lease with Boem in 2017, and we submitted our proposed construction operations plan for the project late last year. We also have additional information on our website, kittyhawkoffshore.com, inclusive of a virtual open house that was recently launched. Next slide. So who's Avangrid Renewables? Who are we? Essentially, we're an American developer of renewable energy. We've been, we're, as you can see on this slide, the third largest wind developer in the country. We've got a presence in over 24 states. We've got over 8,000 megawatts of renewable energy and wind and solar in operations. We're headquartered in Connecticut, and we're traded on the New York Stock Exchange. We're also known as the only developer to have sited, permitted, and constructed, and currently operating a wind farm onshore in North Carolina, in Eastern North Carolina, called the Amazon Wind Farm Project. We've had a presence in Virginia since August of last year, where we opened up a project office in the town center of Virginia Beach, Virginia. Next slide, please. But as we know, we're here to talk about offshore. So it's important to note that while Auburn Renewables has been successfully and responsibly developing onshore renewable energy projects, we're also part of a larger global team called the Iberdrola Network. And Iberdrola is one of the world's largest offshore wind developers. Iberdrola, as our parent company, brings many of the resources and expertise associated with permitting, constructing, and operating offshore wind projects to our well-established onshore team that we've got here stateside. Auburn Renewables is also a joint venture partner, 50-50 partner with Copenhagen Infrastructure Partners. And as you all may be aware, we are co-owners in that JV for projects known as Vineyard Wind, which has recently gone through the permitting process and has received its record of decision. Next slide, please. This slide here is meant to show you a bit about the Kitty Hawk project and let you know who we are as a project. Please play the clip.
I'm proud to work in offshore wind. It's a rapidly growing industry, and it's bringing thousands of jobs to coastal communities. North Carolina and Virginia are home to some of the most powerful offshore wind resources in the country. And here at Kitty Hawk, we're working closely with the military and with the fishing and shipping industries to develop wind power in a safe and responsible way. We're proud that our work will have lasting benefits for generations to come.
Thank you. Next slide. So the Kitty Hawk offshore wind project is well positioned to achieve the goals listed on this slide. Located due east of Crever, North Carolina, approximately 27 miles offshore, the project has the potential to contribute to meeting the goals of both the Virginia Clean Economy Act and the North Carolina Clean Energy Plan, which is set out to a 70% reduction in power sector greenhouse gas emissions by 2030 and a carbon neutrality goal by 2050. Furthermore, the development within the lease area has the potential to contribute to North Carolina's effort to develop 2.8 gigawatts of offshore wind by 2030 and 8 gigawatts by 2040. As you can also see here, the construction operations plan, the project would connect to a point of interconnection within the PGM managed high voltage electricity grid. Next slide, please. On this slide, we're showing here on the left side the actual wind energy area outlined in black, as well as the wind development area in the northwest corner there shaded in light pink. This project here represents the construction operations plan put forward. And as I mentioned, it's 27 miles due east of North Carolina. It's 37 miles southwest or southeast, excuse me, of Virginia Beach. The entire wind energy area has an approximate capacity of about 2,500 megawatts, and which, if fully built out or when fully built out, would power approximately 700,000 homes. The waters are fairly shallow here, 20 to 40 meters deep, and as such, we'll be utilizing fixed bottom foundations. As I mentioned, in 2020, we submitted that construction operations plan that's before you all now for public comment. And in that construction operations plan, we've identified approximately 40% of the wind energy area to be developed. This development consists of up to 69 wind turbine generators and one electrical service platform or offshore substation. Coming out of the northwest corner of this graphic on the left in purple represents the export cable corridor. Within this export cable corridor, we're proposing 2 submarine cables, which would be co-located with a point of it with a landfall in Virginia Beach, Virginia. That landfall would be in the Sandbridge area of Virginia Beach, and it consists of an established parking lot. This is where that offshore export cable corridor, export cable, would be connected to our onshore cable. Our onshore cable would also be buried, and it's along existing rights of way associated with Virginia Beach, Virginia, as you can see in the northwest corner, in the northwest, in the north, and the right side of this slide. This onshore cable route, as I mentioned, would be exclusively within existing rights of way, consisting of existing roads and or rights of way with existing infrastructure in them. Our team is also investigating a North Carolina routes as possible and landing sites as part of the PGM potential markets. As I mentioned previously, we've had this lease, this wind energy area with Renewable since 2017. And during this time and up to this point, we've been conducting numerous offshore surveys. We've also been conducting geotechnical and geophysical surveys, as well as having a mid-ocean buoy out in the wind energy area, collecting mid-ocean data, wind speeds, tides, currents, ocean temperatures, etc. That was associated with a site assessment plan, which was approved back in April of 2020. Next slide, please. So as Brian had mentioned, within our construction operations plan, we've put forward a project design envelope. This project design envelope allows our engineering and development team maximum flexibility for the rapidly changing technologies associated with wind turbine generators in the offshore industry. This wind energy area, as Will mentioned, was well cited by the Intergovernmental Task Force and has been deconflicted of many of the shipping and natural resource constraints associated with offshore wind development. As this table describes, we're looking at putting together wind turbines up to a range of 317 meters. And as I mentioned in the previous slide, we're looking at up to 67 monopoles and 3 suction case on jacket foundations being shown on this slide here are representative figures. So put forth within our project design envelope, we have a monopole, a jacket foundation, and a suction case on foundation. The one offshore electrical service platform as well. And as previously shown, the onshore cable corridor, approximately 5.7 miles. Next slide, please. Okay, great. So a few more things that folks are probably interested in. As shown on this actual slide here, we've got a uniform grid. It's laid out in the northeast, southwest axis. This axis is consistent with the predominant trawl tow directionality in this area and is representative of feedback that our fishery liaison officers received from commercial fishermen that utilize or historically have utilized the wind energy area. On the right, you can see dimensions of the maximum end of our project design envelope associated with the wind turbine generators. This is showing a blade tip of up to 317 meters. Next slide, please. So the proposed construction schedule is put forth in the COP. Is shown on this slide here. The schedule is based upon, of course, getting through these scoping process, the NEPA process with Bohm and the cooperating agency permits that associated with the NEPA process. Typically, onshore construction is initiated first and takes about 1 year to complete. This includes building a new onshore substation within a parcel of property that's under site control currently in an area of Virginia Beach, Virginia, known as Corporate Landing Business Park. Following the onshore transmission line installation, the offshore construction begins with the export cable corridor and cables being laid offshore. Offshore, once those export cable corridors, the export cables are laid offshore, we then move on to begin to install the foundations, and then lastly, the wind turbine generators and the cells are installed. This offshore work takes about over 1.5 years approximately, with the total construction of the project being around 2.5 years. When fully constructed, the project is expected to go into commercial operation in late 2026, at which point Kitty Hawk will be delivering clean, renewable energy to the grid and avoiding millions of tons of carbon dioxide emissions annually. Next slide, please. So this slide's showing the various cooperating agency permits. We are at Kitty Hawk a Fast 41 covered project. Being a Fast 41 project essentially means that our milestones and our schedule is well laid out on a dashboard called the permitting dashboard. This allows us as a developer to be held accountable for our deliverables, for the assessments that we need to get done and the permits that we need to put in place to begin construction, as well as for cooperating agencies to have a transparent process for approving and reviewing those permits. On the left side there are the various permit applications that are shown on the dashboard. As we've been talking about, we submitted our construction operations plan last December, and we've got a scheduled DEIS of next September with a final EIS in June 2023 and a record decision in August of 2023. At that point, Bohm will approve the project with conditions, approve it outright or deny it. Once the COP is approved in November of 2023, we'll then shortly thereafter begin construction. We've also got cooperating agencies associated with NOAA, NIMS, the Army Corps of Engineers, the Environmental Protection Agency, and of course, Section 106 of the National Historic Preservation Act. Next slide, please. As I mentioned earlier, we've got Kitty Hawk Offshore Wind is the website for the project. This website recently highlights the virtual open house that we've launched, where you'll find lots of information on the project, studies that we've conducted to date, assessments that are ongoing, surveys that have been completed, and surveys that are upcoming. Additionally, this is the project team contact information here, and we look forward to hearing any questions, comments, and do our best to answer them as they come forward. Thank you for your time. I hope you have a good evening.
Great. Thank you, Brian, and thank you to all of our presenters this evening. In just a minute, we'll take a quick break to let folks stretch before we start the formal public comments. As a reminder, please feel free to continue to type any questions that you would like to have clarified in the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. Following the public comments, we'll have time for Bohm representatives to respond to your questions. We will stop taking new clarifying questions at the close of the public comment portion of today's meeting. I will note that any questions that are submitted to the Q&A will not be considered as formal scoping comments for the NEPA process. So if you wish to make a formal comment, please either plan to speak today or submit your comments through regulations.gov or through the US mail. At this point, let's take a quick 5-minute break, and we will convene at 6:28 p.m. Eastern Time. Thank you. We'll be back in 5 minutes. Okay, folks, welcome back. I think we're ready to get started with the public comment portion of today's meeting. As a reminder, I'll call on the people who registered to make a comment when they pre-registered. After all of those folks have commented, I'll ask if anyone else would like to make a comment. You would then use the raise your hand feature at the bottom of the Zoom platform, or if you're calling in from a phone, you press *9 to raise your hand. I will call on people to comment in the order in which they raise their hand. During the public comment period, I will post the names of the upcoming speakers in the chat so you can see when your turn is coming up. When I call your name, you'll receive a pop-up box on your screen that will allow you to unmute yourself to make a comment. Sometimes that pop-up box gets hidden if you have several other windows open on your computer, so I'd recommend closing any extra open windows now. If you're calling in from a phone, you'll hear a prompt to press *6 to unmute your line. Please remember that if you have any clarifying questions, you can still type those in the question answer box on the bottom of your Zoom platform. We will stop taking new questions once we are finished with the public comment period, so be sure to submit any questions you have as soon as you're able to. Please note that when we receive your question and the team begins working on an answer, we'll move your question to the dismiss category, and then once ready, we'll read your question and provide an answer aloud. A couple of ground rules for all of us to follow during the comment period today. First, please limit your comments to no more than 5 minutes. I'll post a timer on the screen to help you keep track of your time. At the end of your time, I'll jump in to ask you to quickly wrap up your comments to allow other people the opportunity to provide comments. If you're not able to complete your comments within the allotted time, you may still submit them in writing before the end of the public scoping comment period, which ends on August 30th of 2021. Second, please be respectful towards everyone who provides comments during today's meeting. You each have a unique and valued perspective, and no comment is considered more important than another. Comments that are directed to or about another commenter are not in line with the intent of today's meeting and will not be allowed. Should any comments or action begin to distract from the purpose of this public scoping meeting, the speaker may be placed on mute or removed from the online platform. Finally, I apologize for mispronouncing anyone's name this evening. All right, let's go ahead and get started. The first 3 speakers we have as part of our pre-registration are Robert Fern, Marianne Dubresson, and Sam Celestro. If you would please raise your hand and I will ask you to unmute. Again, Robert Fern, Marianne Dubresson, and Sam Celestro. Okay, I don't yet see Marianne. I do see Robert. Robert, I'm going to ask you to unmute.
Very good. I should be unmuted now.
You're unmuted. You have 5 minutes.
Thank you so much. My name is Robert Fern, and I live in Corolla, North Carolina. I'm a member of the National Audubon Society, and I serve as the director of the Pine Island Audubon Sanctuary, a 2,000-acre preserve in Corolla that works to create a resilient and sustainable future for both the wild and built communities of the Outer Banks. At Audubon, we recognize that climate change is the leading threat to bird survival, and that is why we support the need for responsibly sited and operated offshore wind energy to achieve our clean energy goals and to protect the places birds need now and in the future. I ask that Boem fulfill its responsibility to protect migratory birds by supporting regional monitoring and adaptive management programs, and requiring that Avangrid adopt practices to reduce bird collisions with turbines at the Kitty Hawk Wind Project. I thank you for the opportunity to speak today.
Thank you for your comments. Our next speaker is Sam Celestro. Sam, I'm going to ask you to unmute.
Good evening. My name is Sam Celestro. I'm the Director of Strategic Partnerships for the Business Network for Offshore Wind. The Business Network is a national nonprofit focused on the development of the U.S. offshore wind industry and its related supply chain, including helping local businesses enter the offshore wind supply chain. The network supports Bohm's deliberate consideration and commitment to environmental protection, including during the development of the Kitty Hawk EIS. That work also encourages Bohm to continue moving the Kitty Hawk project forward through the federal permitting process so that it can commence operations soon and avoid delay. By meeting permitting and project timelines, Bohm will foster greater certainty in the U.S. offshore wind market, further develop a domestic supply chain, and help ensure the administration's goal of installing 30 gigawatts by 2030 is achieved. Offshore wind is a once-in-a-generation opportunity for Americans, and the industry is surging globally. By some estimates, the rapidly developing economic opportunity in offshore wind will well exceed $100 million for wind farm development and construction. It does not even account for 30 years of operations and maintenance, all of which will benefit local economies. This will create tens of thousands of jobs all over the United States and in the local communities closest to the wind farms. The Kitty Hawk project will provide numerous benefits to the people of Virginia and North Carolina and create new job opportunities in both locations. The initial phase of the project will construct up to 69 turbines, representing $1.5 billion in economic impact in Virginia and northeastern North Carolina, and creating 800 jobs a year during the construction phase and many hundred more during the operations phase. The state of Virginia is emerging as a true offshore wind leader, and it is benefiting its residents and all Americans. In 2020, the state set a goal of 5.2 gigawatts of offshore wind by 2034 and committed to 100% clean energy grid. Virginia businesses are already benefiting from the offshore wind industry in the Hampton Roads area, and northeastern North Carolina has the potential to be an important hub for the industry. Virginia and North Carolina are both working hard to train its residents for the new industry by supporting the Mid-Atlantic Wind Training Alliance that will offer industry-required certifications that are critical to the operations and long-term maintenance of these wind farms. Finally, the state of Virginia both states joined its neighbors in Maryland to form the Smart Power Compact to better coordinate state activities around offshore wind and help ensure each state is maximizing its benefits from this new industry. By moving forward with the Kitty Hawk project EIS, Boem can help Virginia achieve its offshore wind clean energy goals, help support the state economies of North Carolina and Virginia, and further secure the development of a domestic supply chain. Business Network thanks the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management for the opportunity to comment, and we look forward to continuing to work together to grow the U.S. offshore wind industry and its supply chain. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your comments. Okay, our last pre-registered individual, Marianne Dubresson, does not appear to be on the Zoom tonight. So those are all the folks who pre-registered to make a comment today. If you did not pre-register but would like to make a comment, I would ask that you please use the raise your hand feature located at the bottom of your Zoom platform, or press *9 if you're using a phone and calling in tonight. I'll call on your name in the order in which you raise your hand, and you'll receive a pop-up box asking you to unmute. If you dialed in by phone, you'll press *6 to unmute and then remute again. Would anyone else like to make a public comment this evening? Again, if you'd like to make a public comment, just at the bottom of your screen, click on the raise hand feature, and I will call on you and unmute you. Okay, seeing none, and since we just took a break, we'll go ahead and move into the question and answer session of our meeting tonight. Again, before we move into the Q&A feature, just a reminder, as we previously discussed, you can submit your comments through regulations.gov or through the US mail, but please remember that public scoping comments are due by August 30th of this year. All right, so I'll read aloud the questions that have been posted through the question and answer box, and one of our Boem representatives will come on camera and provide a response. As a reminder, at this point, we will not be accepting any new questions. We'll be responding to the questions that you have raised already during the meeting. So the first question is from Ian Slayton. The first question is from Chris Carnival. and the question is, will the EIS estimate air pollution reduction from clean power replacing fossil power? And I believe Ian Slayton with Bohm is standing by to provide us a response. Ian?
Hello, my name is Ian Slayton. I'm a physical scientist for Boem. So the EIS will estimate pollution reduction and associated health benefits from that reduction using EPA's AVERT tool, which stands for Avoided Emissions and Generation Tool. And if you search for that, you can find this on their website. And also COBRA, or Co-Benefits Risk Assessment Health Impact Screening and Mapping Tool. And these tools are used the existing generation mix and associated emissions from the grid where the proposed project will connect.
Okay, great. Thanks, Ian. Appreciate the response. Okay, folks, we actually only received one question this evening. So I will just ask, are there any more questions or anyone else who'd like to provide a public comment this evening? All right, seeing none, I'll turn things over to Michelle Morin, the Chief of the Environmental Branch for Renewable Energy for Bohm, for a few closing remarks. Michelle.
Yeah, thank you, Jennifer. And thanks the rest of ICF and Boem staff for holding, I think, a very successful third and final of our scoping meetings for the Kitty Hawk EIS. And Jennifer, thank you for facilitating. Brian and Will from Boem for your presentations, and Brian from Kitty Hawk for your presentation as well. Our turnout hovered about 40 individuals as the meeting progressed. So thank you all for sticking with us and participating this evening. And thank you for your comments and the question we received. As Brian described at the beginning of the meeting, there will be an additional comment period and more public meetings when we publish the draft EIS next fall of 2022. And just a reminder that the end of this current scoping comment period ends on August 30th. And your input's really essential for this and future comment periods, because we all share the same goals to have the best informed decision about this and other projects. So I definitely encourage you to submit comments if you haven't already. And thank you again for participating in today's public scoping meeting.
Great, thank you, Michelle. All right, folks. Thank you for participating in today's virtual public scoping meeting. We appreciate your input and involvement in the process. A recording of all 3 virtual meetings will be made available on the project website. Again, for additional information, please visit the virtual meeting room website. This meeting is adjourned. Have a great evening.